Well, sandwiched between the telepath problem we just finished and the Day of the Dead stuff we're going to get to later this week, we have Sheridan having to deal with the problems on this plane of existence. He's signing a bunch of treaties, but when he gets down there, turns out it was all for nothing. The only one present is Delenn, and she's probably already read it. She says that the vote was unanimous to boycott all future meetings until the Alliance can guarantee the safety of their shipping lanes. Even Sheridan has to admit that they have a point when they say that there's no purpose in having an alliance if it can neither protect them nor determine who is to blame for attacking them. I'm no detective, but I'd start with them. What looks like one of the gunners on that ship gets away on an escape pod, ending our teaser. We return after the titles to the return of Londo and Jakar, the former preoccupied by his distress whenever he returns to his homeworld, and the latter by all these Narn looking at him. Jakar had made the mistake of starting this return making fun of Londo, that perhaps it's his destiny to never be happy. So Londo seizes upon this to speak of the great popularity of Jakar so long as he goes away. He suggests making money by offering for people to pay Jakar to go away and never come back. There's a few people I'd take out a loan for on that option.
You okay? You look like crap.
Garibaldi may be feeling the same. If you'll remember, last time he responded to the news that his brain had been programmed by hitting the booze again. And alcoholism is like seepage. Have a gap and you're dealing with a flooded basement. Maybe a weird simile, but I picked that one because it describes what it'd be like when you get drunk, wake up, and realize you peed your pants. At the meeting, Delenn mentions about our possible survivor, but Garibaldi recognizes the situation when she mentions he's human. It means these are smugglers working for the Drazi government because by treaty they officially can't allow certain goods. So they hire smugglers to bring those goods in so they can deny any knowledge of it. That means the Drazi won't help with this. They have more to lose revealing the smuggling than to gain by cooperation. Fortunately, Garibaldi knows a guy who's a security consultant on the Drazi homeworld. He can likely help. But he shoots down the idea of Dr. Franklin going along. He's very insistent on this. Sometimes it's vital to move without attracting attention. For some, this is harder than others. He finds his old friend Talon, the guy with the sword that Sheridan had crossed paths with when they were both taken by aliens. Talon came by because Jakar's book, the one he's been writing for the last 2 years, is missing. Only not missing. Talon knows exactly where it is. It was taken away out of fear that Jakar had been captured again and would never return. They didn't want this great work to be lost. In fact, reading it, they realized how great a work it was. In fact, they decided to make a few copies of it for their friends, where it sort of snowballed. Now there's probably more than 500,000 copies floating around.
Congratulations, Citizen Jakar. You are now a religious icon.
Unless that impresses human cheerleaders, I don't think it'll matter to Jakar. As Garibaldi is about to leave, Franklin stops him to ask if there's something wrong between them. He says Garibaldi gave reasons for him not to go along, but not the actual important one, whatever it is. Well, Garibaldi insists there's nothing wrong. If anything, he's just looking out for Franklin because he's a good friend, and he doesn't want to put him in danger when it would only compromise the mission anyway. It's important to look out for your friends.
And am I in here?
Not by name, by description. Natak Burala. It's a colloquialism.
Which means?
Prideful wind catcher.
It's said with affection. The book is clearly popular, though. Can't argue with the public's reaction. Garibaldi soon takes in his balcony green screen view before his contact arrives. His friend, Tafik, is here because human security is a status thing among the Drazi, but apparently not enough to deter them, because he's found out the Drazi would rather kill Garibaldi than let him find the survivor. However, the fact they want to take their losses out of the survivor's hide gives that guy a lot of incentive to work with Garibaldi. So it's give and take in this job.
What do you think of my city?
Well, I think it's hot, crowded, it's noisy, and it's old.
Yeah, it's like going to the antique mall. Tafik talks about Drazi architecture, the reason the balconies are huge and the rooms small. The reason they prefer tight streets instead of normal-sized ones. An old tradition that has a good reason behind it. Now we do it just because. What's clever about this is that this little aside they have about things change but tradition remains is a fine little bit of world building on its own. But what it also does then is explains why the streets, which are on a soundstage after all, are so small. Anyway, the plan is that Garibaldi needs to wait for the signal from the survivor. Then we can work out the details, get the hell out of here, and he can go back to enjoying his hot, crowded, noisy, and old city. Well, showing sound judgment, the two then proceed to drink an entire bottle of booze while waiting for that important signal.
I'm going to take care of your travel arrangements.
Is that literal, or is that a euphemism for heading off to poop? Well, he won't be doing either, as he gets shot in the hallway. But Garibaldi is fine and even wakes up in time for the signal. Except he comes across the assassin over Tawfik's body. A fight breaks out, but gravity is hungry, hungry for blood. There's a patrol ship outside, and Garibaldi runs off, checking in on Tawfik, who is dying. He takes it much better than I would. Probably the booze. Damn, someone rolled a natural 20 on their tumbling skill. As for Garibaldi, he comes across cloaked figures and, for the second episode in a row, gets his ass kicked by a mob of people. This is really the time you have to think about maybe, I don't know, going back to being in bed with the girlfriend who has a Martian business empire. He finds that the survivor is no longer the survivor, but he did tear something off one of the cloaked figures. But now he's Drazi's most wanted and calls Delenn to say he needs a White Star to pick him up. They're looking everywhere for him, and a man beaten to a pulp, that tends to stand out in a crowd. Speaking of crowds, Jakar is hiding from the one in the hallway outside his quarters. While talking to Talon, he brings up the time they offered him the chance to become supreme ruler of the Narn, and he not only refused without hesitation, he has had no second thoughts on that, no regrets. Talon brings up the point about them both having a sword, but Jakar's is in his heart, and those with swords have a duty to use them for their people.
For 100 years, we have taught ourselves one thing: how to hate and how to fight.
Okay, that's two things, but there's a lot of overlap.
It's not about teaching something. It's about unlearning hatred and unlearning fear.
But if we turn our back on hate and fear, why, we might have to actually do something constructive. Who the hell wants that? Jakar fears that ultimately he's going to be just what Talon said earlier, an icon. It won't be about the change that is needed to survive and flourish. It'll be about him. But he finally sees Talon's point and invites them inside for now. But soon is at the meeting for the debriefing with Mr. Garibaldi. He shares what happened, but then mentions that whoever was in the cloaks weren't Drazi. He doesn't know who, but the Drazi have a tougher hide. Londo arrives late and recognizes what he took, a button off one of the Imperial Guard uniforms. This is worrying because they knew exactly what they were looking for, which means they knew what we knew. Therefore, there must be a spy, QED. The fact they had this button suggests that Londo might be unintentionally leaking information. Maybe even just his regular reports are doing it, if they're high up enough. Garibaldi raises the possibility that Londo could actually be of help there, but Jakar says that's the worst possible thing to do. I mean, in this context, trying to swallow wasps is probably higher on the list. The point is, Londo would be so outraged he'd dig into it, and whoever had protected him from the assassins would likely now have a reason to be his assassin. It's the Royal Palace hoedown. Dr. Franklin earlier had his dinner interrupted, and now is giving a log entry about it. The interruption, not that he missed dinner. We only really learn one thing, that he's leaving. Guess he's tired of getting beaten up in his own med lab. Jakar, meanwhile, is trying to teach the new followers, but this guy says, the book says that the Centauri are not to be trusted. Jakar says yes, that shows how he had to grow to gain understanding. The guy doesn't want to believe that. All of this must be correct, he says. So Jakar says, yeah, okay. And also that you should always trust a fellow Narn, right? So he tells the guy to put his face in the book.
There's lesson number one.
Thank you, most holy. Dr. Franklin goes to broach the topic now with Sheridan that he spoke to Dr. Kyle. Remember him? The original CMO back in The Gathering? He's the head of xenobiological research at Earth Dome, only he's stepping down, and Franklin is going to be taking over. It's a post that would actually enhance his existing job of getting information on alien diseases, solving mysteries. Like the case of the missing whiskey. The Ragged Edge is somewhat important, as it is the point when Jakar becomes a religious figure, and it's the first hint that the Centauri are involved for the characters. Of course, we already knew that because we'd previously seen them there. We should also note, by the way, that the evidence is kind of thin. I mean, we have seen already that the bad guys are willing to plant evidence to throw suspicion different ways. And I'll be honest, the Imperial button thing, that screams clue that is deliberately put there by the writer because they need to give a clue. I'm not saying it's impossible for it to have been there, that they would be wearing their uniforms underneath. I'm just saying it seems an awful clue on a silk pillow kind of a situation. Anyway, I'm going to give the Ragged Edge a stamp of recommended. While it's sad to see Garibaldi crawl into the bottle, I still enjoyed his stuff overall this week, and Jakar and Talon shine in every scene they have together. Jakar's ever-growing outrage as more details come about his book is a real gem. This feels like the show is getting its footing once again.